have all these. Thank you. So anyways, yeah, go ahead. So
although I didn't come to class, although I know what today's class is about, I didn't have time to read it. I'd like to be free from self-doubt all the time. That if I had been in class, that's what I would have learned about.
if only.
Seder.
Nice. Yeah. Lauren, how about you?
So unfortunately, we put our dog to sleep the day of the first Seder night. And so my grandson, who's 4, understood. And then the 2 kids next door came, and of course they knew Penny. And so the question they asked is, where is Penny now? So that was the question, like, how do you answer to children, where is heaven? And I said, if any of them had an answer, please share it with me, because I wasn't exact. So that was the question that was discussed at our Seders, like, how do you explain to children, where is, I mean, they understand heaven, they understand death, and and they, well, where, what do you mean, where is she now?
Right. It's such an interesting way that you framed it, because there's 2 questions there. One is, how do you talk about it, which is very cerebral and almost academic, right? Like, here are the tools that you need in order to answer that question. And we could talk a lot about that, because there's a lot of different ways to approach it, right? And then there's actually coming up with the thought, right? And that's even more extraordinary. And even more difficult. What's extraordinary is how difficult it is for people to answer that, because I mean, who knows, right? So the question is, what is it that you think you know?
Nothing.
When you're answering that? What is it that you believe, right? And the idea that you have to construct a belief about something, because it feels like there's something to believe, including I don't believe there's anything. Right. Like, it's just, and which, by the way, might be, if not gently explained to a child, might be difficult to handle. Yeah. However, it might actually be quite liberating when you talk to a child and you are able to share with them that, bodies are bodies and spirits are different. And like, how we remember stuff is not tied to a body, that kind of approach. You would be remarkably, I think we're so afraid to tell kids that bodies are finite, that things break, that we die, right? That, like, death is a part of life. It's very hard, right? Part of it is our own sort of mishigas about it, right? Because we don't want it. But when you talk to kids about it, they're like, yeah, okay, great, moving on, right? I have one of the best stories about my son Ethan, who was 5, and he asked me, how long do we live? And I said, like, how long are we supposed to live? So I didn't know, like, was this a conceptual length, right? Or was this like a definitive mathematical thing? So I gave him the Jewish answer. I said, well, in Judaism, it says we live to be 120 years, right? And he promptly began to start crying. And I said, why are you crying? Why are you crying? And he said, because my friend Julia is 3 months older than I am, and she's gonna die before me. And you're like, and you're like hugging him, and you're like, it's right. And if you like, the brilliance of it was, you can't answer the question, right? How long do we live for? What happens next, right? You can't answer.
No guarantees.
There's
I would have to say there are no guarantees. Nobody has.
Explain that to a 4-year-old. There are no guarantees either.
So right, so you can't say no guarantees, but you could talk about what you don't know, and what do you do with what you don't know?
That's
There's
right.
a lot to
It's not knowing.
Brilliant. Obviously, we were just stumbling over that as a side question. It was a good point. Any other like Passover related stuff that we got from our class? I'll tell you, I did it. So I practice what I'm teaching. Remember our conversation between the wise and the wicked child, right? Mm-hmm. Or the clever one. And remember how we were like really grappling with the nuance. Mm-hmm. So what I thought we had discussed was one of the things is about what does being Jewish mean to you, kind of thing, or when do you feel most Jewish? Mm-hmm. So I asked that question: when do you feel most Jewish? Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful, because everybody, the kids and the adults, everybody was able to have something.
Wow.
And so it was great as a conversation. I also, by the way, the youngest child there was almost 14. So we were able to have a little bit more of a mature conversation. But the fact that like we asked a good question and it really opened up a dialogue was phenomenal. So I was like very happy that, I mean, my family is usually awful. I don't know about your family, but my family is usually awful. They're like, when is this done? Or let's sit respectfully. Don't ask me to give anything because I don't even know what to give. Like I don't want to participate in this. I just want to eat. Right. By the way, this is being recorded. If they ever give this, I'm dead meat. I know I have to be very careful what I'm saying now that's being recorded. Great. So that's fantastic. And so now let's transition into our learning, which I know it's a little bit of a later start, but that's okay. We'll get as far as long as we can.
I want to say what came to my Seder.
Oh, good. Please.
My daughter and her husband and kids went to New Jersey right before, and she had the Seder outside and they brought COVID. They all got COVID like a day and a half after.
Outside.
Yeah, so none of us got it, but that was what was brought to our table.
Wow. You're such an oy vey never. Get Gil happy.
All right, we had a 3-year-old at our Seder this year, so we didn't have any esoteric conversations. We sang Dayenu 5 times. Very little.
Excellent.
That's
It
so
was
great.
Very nice to be together.
It's so great. I was with a wedding couple and they said that they had a 2-year-old and the kid loved Dayenu. So what they had to do, because like the kid's 2, right? Or almost 3, precocious 2 or almost 3. And they would say one thing and then they would sing Dayenu. And they would do another thing and they would sing Dayenu. So like it was like all the way throughout. Yeah, it was the Dayenu theme Seder. I know, right? That's good.
It would have been, and it's so cool.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad that everybody had a meaningful Pesach, however it was celebrated, or that if it was not celebrated this year, because we were traveling in France and eating cheese and baguettes all day long, which I hope you were doing, Lori. Yeah, it
You
was really
didn't
good.
say you were going to France.
No, Lori.
This is about Lori.
Oh,
Yeah, somebody else was eating cheese and bacon.
No. I went to Wisconsin where it snowed. It was snowing, and I was in Boston, right? Because I got a kid looking for college. So
did you decide yet?
no, we made him say Thursday night is his decision date,
Yeah.
and then he gets to sleep on it. And then if he changes his mind Friday morning, then we'll go back and reevaluate. But for the most part, I think we're all kind of in the same place, and it's good. I'm really happy.
What's the front runner?
I don't want to say.
Oh, go ahead. We're not gonna tell.
I know it's about being recorded.
It's on record, right?
I had a
With the initials, give us the,
So I'll tell you this. He's got 4 schools, maybe 5 that he's considering. He is admitted to UC Merced, to the Arizona State University Barrett Honors College, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin,
Yes.
and Brandeis University.
Whoa.
And then if so he has to make a choice of one of those 4.
Wow.
And then if he's admitted to the University of Washington, which he's on the wait list for, he may reconsider.
Huh.
But-
Oh,
Wow.
Bucky.
What
Yeah,
was made
So honestly, it's engineering. At Wisconsin, it would be chemical engineering, and at the Arizona State University Barrett College, it's aerospace engineering. So I think
Sounds
he'd love to figure
Wow.
out alternative rocket fuel. Like
Fabulous.
that would be the thing that he would love to do.
That's fabulous.
My nerd of a son.
Yeah.
All right, so
Okay.
you know what, Jay? I swear we learned, right? You're brand new. Hopefully, you're having fun. Don't like.
I am. Thank you.
We're almost done.
We've been yenting about a lot of stuff, which is good. That by the way is a word in the dictionary, and it is a verb. Okay, like so yenta is a noun. And
My hobby, by the way, my hobby is looking for new fuel for rockets.
oh yeah.
Spare time.
I'm telling you, he's such a nerd. I love it. He loves watching rocket launches, right? Like so he totally got into it. And that was where he kind of like, he's like, gee, I wonder, because I mean, it's very smart, right? It's very practical. He's like, we're going to get better at this. So we have to figure out how to make better stuff. And I'm like, great. You want to go do that for a living? Go for it. Yeah. And if he does it, he'll be a rabbi. All right. So that's what my kid said. He wanted to be a professional baseball player. And he's like, if I can't be a professional baseball player, then I'll be a rabbi. Yeah.
Back up.
Yeah. All right. So I'll tell you, so I'll open it up this way. So we got back and thankfully everybody was healthy, but the travel was very intense for me because we actually landed and then we went to go see another school. So I was exhausted and so exhausted that my body basically it broke and I developed a little bit of a cold. And so, a little bit of cold in these days is a terrible thing. And so I COVID tested once, I COVID tested twice. I was still kind of like, stuffy and achy and tired and sore throaty and all that other stuff. And I'm like, I don't have COVID, right? But my partner and beloved spouse did not believe me. After 2 COVID tests, I still did not believe me. So I took the 3rd COVID test and I'm like, do you see?
Yeah.
You see, it's not COVID. It could be COVID, but it's not COVID, right? So are you satisfied? Are you satisfied with 3 tests? Which you should all be satisfied, by the way. And they're all in close proximity for me. And so she was finally satisfied. So the reason I bring it up, other than like, you should know that I'm okay. The reason I bring it up is that I think the experience of doubt is natural, and doubt as an experience is not something that is it's not a religious dilemma. Even though it's sometimes cast as that, and the whole concept of what this book has become is how do we understand what doubt is and embrace it in such a way that it can have the transformative power of if you will, faith, or even more so of a certain kind of balance, a certain kind of serenity, right? Which is ironic because doubt seems to be unsettling. It's unnerving, right? It breaks down trust. So part of the whole thing is like, I don't have COVID. And Becky's like, I don't believe you, right? And I took 3 tests. I don't have COVID. And like, so what could I have possibly done more to show, right? Like my words weren't enough.
You're giving the evidence.
My test wasn't enough. Right, my BA, like a serological test, it would have been a blood test. It still wouldn't have been enough. So what's going on there, right?
Fear.
At what point does doubt cease to be that serenity inducing, that balance producing, that faithful expression, and become something that, as Fran had sort of spoke out, be an expression of fear? At which point it's not about doubt. It's about fear.
That's right.
Right. So that's what I wanted to focus on today. And that's what we're going to read. We have far too many of the questions that are focused particularly on doubt, but the theme of doubt as they pertain to questions is going to be shared today, primarily with the questions that are in the book of Genesis. That's where most of the doubt is found. And then there's a little bit about Moses as a character. And then at the end, there's a little bit about the sort of like, they've had the Torah, they got the God, they got the rules, they got the promised land. What's left for them to doubt? And how do we contend with, once you have all of the necessary information for which you should be sufficiently faithful that what's going to happen next will be okay, why do you still doubt? Right?
Yes.
Which you would say is fear, but it might be something more. Okay. So let's take a peek. Let's go into our text a little bit today. And by the way, Suzanne, yes or no on text? Do you have them or no?
Rabbi, did you ask me a question?
I did. I asked you if you want to see the text.
I do.
Okay. All right. So give me a second. I'm gonna put it up. And it's gonna be just a little logistically complicated, but don't, because on the iPad, I don't get to see your beautiful mugs. I mean, your beautiful visages. And so just give me a second. There we go. Yes.
Service. It's a full service.
Okay, here we go. All right. So thanks for your patience, everybody. All right, can you see that now? Roberta P. Okay, good.
Yeah,
All right,
thank you.
So these are two quotes that I just pulled out, and I love them. They're beautiful. So one is Bertrand Russell, who's an early 20th century philosopher, 19th, 20th century, and Khalil Gibran is also 19th, 20th century poet. Amazing. If you've ever, he's Lebanese, but if you've ever if you ever have an opportunity to stumble into some of the beauty of his writing, it really is extraordinary. Pardon me. All right. So the fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. Right. So one of what I like about this is that it's not about false confidence, but what it's about is, and it's not about being fearful, but maybe it's about being skeptical, pessimistic, pragmatic, right? Basically looking at the world and saying, you know what, there might be more information here than I see on the surface. And when you are cocksure, which is to use his quote, or actually, you know, a really great, I may have spoken about this book before. The guy's name is escaping me. He's a Princeton University sociology professor, and he wrote a book called On Bullshit, right? Which I have to use that word because that's actually on bullshit, and I can get you the name of the author at the moment, right? So what he points out is, how can you tell something that is, what's the difference between lying and something that's BS, right? And one of the issues is the confidence in it, right? So like, so somebody who tells a lie is really like it's hard to sort of like notice the confidence in it. Somebody who has BS, they talk themselves into believing that it's true, even though it's false. That's what BS is. Here, somebody who is intelligent says, look, I think I know, but I don't know everything. So I'm going to have a little bit of that trust but verify attitude. Okay. And Khalil Gibran writes, doubt is a pain too lonely to know that faith is his twin brother. I love it. It's beautiful. So just if you take nothing away from today, right? Basically what we're dealing with here, the ultimate goal is to understand that doubt is, the other side of doubt is faith, right? And they're twins. They're synonymous, meaning that like if you are curious about or curious about the uncertainty, that is what faith is. It's the moment that you shut down that curiosity and you respond from a place of fear, if you will, that doubt becomes an experience, a painful experience of solitude. Fear is an isolating experience. Faith is a collective gathering experience. So I can't see anybody on the screen. You go, all okay? Or just go ahead and pipe up if you have a comment. Okay. All right. So just because of the way my iPad works, I can't see you. So don't be shy. Now, here's the thing that I think is kind of remarkable. All right. The first question in the Bible, the first question of the Torah is not from God. It's not from the human beings, but it's from the snake. So you know a little bit of the story. Right? So God creates humanity. God says, I'm going to put you in this garden. You can eat everything. You can do whatever you want, but you can't eat from that tree. Right? Which is, you know, kind of not fair. Right?
You definitely want to eat
That
it right
tree,
away.
or it says here of any tree.
Well, so Judy is already picking up on the problem. Right? So no, God says, but of the tree of the fruit of knowledge, don't eat from that. So God says there's everything in this garden, everything is yours except for that tree. Okay, which is pretty devious when you think about it. Because if you've ever been in a place where you're like, you can have everything except that thing,
You want it.
wouldn't you want that?
Right
Of
away.
course you would, right? So obviously there's something to it. Now, the first human beings are totally obedient, and they're not going to eat from the tree until the snake comes along in the 3rd chapter. So let's do a little bit of reading. Judy, you want to read for us?
Upon first
Yeah.
Upon first examination, the first question asked in the Torah is neither preferred by the human being nor by God. Instead, the first question comes from the snake, who proposes to Eve that she eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. It asks, did God really say you should not eat of any tree of the garden? The question is a delicious enticement. Oh, that's good. Enticement, a seduction of curiosity, begging the interpretations of many as to the real intention of the snake's expression. First and foremost, we learn here that the act of questioning introduces a fundamental religious dilemma, that of doubt. We may not know what the voice of God in the universe really intended by any instruction given to the human being. If we read the verse for its simple meaning here, God plainly instructed the human being not to eat the fruit. The human ambivalence by such rigid instruction is what prompts her curiosity. Still, it will be the deviousness of the snake's inquiry and human choice which sets the tone for the remainder of the book.
All right, I'm going to stop the share and we're just going to talk about that first paragraph for a moment, okay? So, hello. Okay, so the first thing is, right, so when you're reading the Torah, this to me was already like, this was earth-shattering, because I think when you study the Torah, the thing that you hear as the first question of the Torah is the one that God asks the human beings, where are you? So you think that that's the first question. In fact, I hear a lot of commentators saying that that's the first question. It's true, that is the first question that God asks the human beings, but it's not the first question. And the idea that the very first kind of expression, interrogative, evocation of uncertainty comes from the snake is something very, very powerful that the book may have unintentionally created by having the snake be the voice of the first question. More so, the way that the snake asks the question is a wedge between God and humanity. Did God really say you can't eat of any tree? Now, that's what Judy picked up. Wait a minute. God said you can't eat of the tree of knowledge. So did the snake? Shouldn't Eve's answer to the snake's question have been, no, we can eat of every tree except for the tree of knowledge. But Eve doesn't go that far. You know, all right, fine. It's an unevolved being. The snake is a little bit more devious. Snake's been, you know, I don't know if the snake, I guess the snake has been, you know, in existence at least 1 or 2 more days in the history of creation than the human being. And apparently those were long days, even if you wanted to take the sort of, astronomical view, or the sort of Big Bang creationist view of how many years was a single day in the history of creation. Regardless, right? The snake has a little bit of knowledge that it uses in manipulation of the human being. Let me pause right there. Any reactions before we go on? Like, what else do you see here? First of all, it should catch it, right? All right, so let's see what happens next. All right. You want to read a little bit more, Judy? Or you want to? No. Okay, go for it. Fran, you're up.
The Midrashic tradition even comes along to point out that the narrative of the serpent isn't even necessary in the development of the grand story of humanity outlined in the Bible. One could read the concluding verse of chapter 2, and they were naked, and resume the narrative in the middle of chapter 3, where it states, and the man called his wife Eve, and God made garments of skins for them. The entire episode is predicated on the interrogative, as if to introduce the deceptive course questions can take upon us. Expulsion from Eden, then, is the consequence of nakedness. Perhaps this is the greatest challenge to the God of all. There is doubt with which we must contend. Doubt in the face of faith is like standing naked in an unfamiliar place.
Go ahead, more.
I find that the introduction of this doubt is validated throughout the Torah. It is doubt which proves that our devotion and allegiance to God does not come from a correction or reconciliation or by denying the existence of uncertainty. Rather, we are taught through this example how we must carefully and properly address our doubting conscience. Perhaps questions expand our consciousness and help us become more divine ourselves, or perhaps the questions are deceptions of a truth originally intended for acceptance.
All right, so pause right there. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's sort of like unpack this a little bit. So the one thing is, if you wanted to be an interpreter of the Torah, you could say this whole narrative, and there's one tradition that says this whole thing about the snake is like it's a separate story that was either like added layer or it's unnecessary. Because if you do if you read the story about nakedness, right, you say the human beings were naked and they felt no shame. And then after the whole apple eating episode or fruit eating episode, afterwards it says God made garments of skin for them and hence clothed them from their nakedness. And everything in between is kind of like a digression. So one, that seems nice and convenient. Two, so why was it important, if that's the case, to put in something that talks about, maybe wrestles with this concept of nakedness? Why is it that nakedness becomes a subject? It could just simply have been, hey, you know what? By the way, human beings, when they're born, they're naked, right? Right? That's kind of how it comes, right? I mean, I know that we try really hard to clothe our babies in the finest clothing that we can possibly put them in. But like, for the most part, they're coming into the world. And when you're having a baby, you know, for those who have been privileged to give birth to children, it's not done in Louis Vuitton, right?
No.
You're not carrying a purse and being like, oh, I need to have my lipstick, right? I mean, you could, right? But like, there's something so like authentic about the experience of being human that has nothing to do with the layers of skin that we put upon us, layers of skin, layers of clothing, all those other things. And ultimately, our humanity becomes defined in part by how we dress ourselves. So if the story is an insertion of how we grapple with the nakedness, what I think is this concept of doubt is something that maybe God never anticipated the human being ever having to deal with, which is why the snake is important. Because the snake comes in and asks, did God really ask did God really say you can't eat of any tree in the garden? The point being that the snake is introducing or validating the experience inside the human being that even God wasn't aware of. God created all of the universe. Why? It seems like doubt would be something that God would not create, especially when God said, eat of everything that you want to eat, but you're not allowed to eat of this thing. Wouldn't the obedient creature do exactly what God said? So why is this a problem? Especially when the answer should have been no. Eve could have simply said, no, we can eat of everything. We just can't eat of that tree. But they have doubt, and doubt is akin to nakedness. It's a different kind of nakedness. It's a sense of, I don't feel equipped to handle that which I see before me without something else, to either it's knowledge or it's some sort of like protection, some sort of layering that will enable me to confront that which I don't know in front of me. That is an experience of being human. You know, what do animals do sort of biologically, right? If they feel a sense of like doubt and fear, they usually get out, right? And human beings, by the way, usually do that as well, right? And speaking of the natural universe, when creatures feel a sense of uncertainty, but they know that they need that maybe because they're hungry. What do? They become predators, right? They figure out how to deal with their, like, how can I tactically maneuver around this situation so that I can gain an advantage to get what I need. Okay, so without going too far afield on that, the concept of nakedness and the introduction of doubt in between the concept of nakedness is trying to teach us in part that doubt is an experience of nakedness that needs to be addressed, right? You can't just leave doubt as it is. You can't just instill faith without confronting the doubt that exists as well. Okay, so Judy's gonna have something. Yeah.
First of all, Linda's the one that came up with the tree question. Second of all,
You get the credit.
Yeah.
I found it. I didn't-
second of all, does the nakedness, when people die, they're supposed to go back
Yeah,
without, with just
amazing. Yeah,
and no Louis Vuitton or anything.
that's right.
Yeah.
So that's a nice comment, right? And even more so, we feel the need to wrap a body in a shroud. But like ultimately, does the body need that?
No.
No, right? Because the body's going to decay and the shroud's going to eventually decay. Yeah.
Ashes to ashes.
Yeah.
What about the concept of shame? Was anything going on here to make Adam and Eve feel shamed in their nakedness? I mean, where'd that,
Yeah.
it seems like it was shameful to be naked.
That's what I think we read, right? That like nakedness is something of shame. But if you notice, as I said in that last paragraph, right? The immediately preceding the episode, it says, and the two of them were in the garden, they were naked and they didn't feel any shame. So there is an introduction to the concept of shame. Then after the episode, God makes skin for them as if they can't do it themselves, right? So there is a concept that nakedness can be associated with shame, but your interpretation of that shame is not that being naked is shameful. It's actually, as we keep on reading, we'll see, it's actually the avoidance of the doubt and resolving the doubt that induces the shame. That's my thought. Linda, you want to give it a shot and read a little bit? Hold on, let me get everything up on the screen. Any comments on screen? Everybody okay? How are we doing? Everybody's okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Jay, you got something?
I have a question. Out of all the types of tree, why did God not want them to eat the tree of knowledge? I would
Right.
think, is it because he wanted us to have to ask more and more questions and didn't want to spoon feed us the knowledge? I would think, like, as a Jew, that's what we strive for, is knowledge.
Right. So there's wonderful and very elaborate interpretations about what kind of tree it is. Because in a way, if you read the interpretations, there's this thing called the tree of knowledge, and there's this thing called the tree of good and evil. And it's intended that the two are the same. But if you are a very astute reader, you read it as if they're two separate trees. Then you're like scratching your head. It says God. So what did God tell us to do? Not eat the tree of knowledge, or not eat from the tree of good and evil? By the way, both of those have their own layers of problems. So one interpretation is that they're actually two separate trees, but that their roots are intertwined. Okay, that's a beautiful reading of it. But ultimately, Harold Kushner, who is a modern rabbi, and maybe you read his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, he wrote another book about how good do we have to be. And one of the things that, if you haven't read it, it's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful book. I actually think it's his best book. But in the book, he talks about the fact that God needed them to leave the garden. So because what happens is, after leaving the garden, they develop what is called a conscience. So if you have everything available to you and you have no doubt, and your nakedness is not, there's no conflict, then you don't develop conscience. And that what God needs in the world is a partner to help heal the brokenness through the consciousness of the human being. Are you with me? Right? This is tikkun olam. the concept that the world, so God created a world, but it's not a perfect world. It's not a perfect world. So part of it is that nature is broken and ugly and imperfect. And part of it is that the universe, the sort of magnitude and the grandeur of the universe cannot be contained by the thing that we occupy, which is called the planet Earth. That's why we're still, exploring the vast reaches of the universe to continually quest for knowledge, Jay, right? And it's celebrated to do that. What God said is that you're not allowed to eat from the fruit. I would just interpret it here because that would prompt us to make judgment without Torah, right? So if we eat the fruit without having a context in which to understand its purpose, then God does not want us to partake in that. And the consequence of that is our expulsion from the paradise of Eden. But in Harold Kushner's reading, which I totally validate, that's the moment that God's like, don't come back. And the human beings don't come back. Last comment on this. There's a beautiful, beautiful midrash about leaving the garden. Then Adam and Eve leave the garden, and if you read it, there's a cherub of fire. There's like this angel that like prevents entrance from the garden, and Adam and Eve in the midrash, they go to the cherub and actually are told you're allowed to enter paradise again, and they say no, thank you, no, thank you. Not that outside the garden is better, but I guess you could say, but outside the garden is more real than living inside the garden. That's a beautiful thought as well. That like, if we're trying to, so, Jay, long answer to your very, very good question. It's not that we are discouraged from knowledge. On the contrary, we are totally encouraged from knowledge, right? But it's knowledge to help us understand our reality, as opposed to knowledge which helps us to construct a world of perfection that doesn't exist. Okay, is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Good. All right. I mean, I could go for an hour on it alone because I think it's huge. All right, great. Linda, you ready? Let me share the content and get everybody going, and then you'll read for the rest of us. Okay. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay.
Did God really say you should not eat of any tree in the garden, being the first question of the Torah, of the Bible, also suggests that the entire purpose of the book is to grapple with this question alone, or at best the implication of this question. Even the construction of the question deviously undermines the statement that God does not actually make. Of every tree in the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat, for as soon as you eat it, you shall die.
Right. So, which by the way, they don't die. Right. No. So that's an interesting kind of point. So we're already left with a broken narrative. Right. So remember, if we just take this piece out, right, and it says, don't eat from the tree, and they're naked and they don't feel any shame, and then God clothes them in garments of skin and then expels them from the garden, right? Right? Put some clothes on, right? They don't die, right? They don't die from eating it. Actually, I think humanity, at least as long as it's been recorded, we're still going strong. Artificial intelligence might change that in a billion years, but in the meantime, we're still going strong as a human community, right? We still have something to offer. And what is that? It is, in very many respects, it is our quest to confront, embrace, resolve our doubt and uncertainty. That's the thing that animates us and compels us and moves us forward. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Yeah. Somebody else. Are you sure? That was just a little paragraph. Okay. Lauren, do you want to read a little bit? And God responds to Genesis of legacy. Now, this is just before you read, this is from the story of Avram. This is before he becomes Abraham. And God says, you know, get up, go to this land that I'm going to show you. And then that's in chapter 12. So he goes to Egypt and he goes to the journey. And so now Avram's in the land, and Avram's wondering, God said, you know, I'm going to make you a great nation. And he's like, well, how's that going to work? Because I don't have any kids. Right. So he's doubting. All right. He's doubting. What is it you promised me something? I don't know. How is it that you are going to fulfill what you said is your promise if I don't have anything to show for it? So watch what he does.
What marvelous imaginations we possess, in which we can believe we predict the future. Yet in our imaginations, we also narrow the scope of possibilities. We may imagine a future beyond any possible realities, but even that is a function of our limited expanse. We imagine futures that we hope might yet be, but we are left with an uncertainty that such a possibility may not be realized. Hence, we have doubts. A question safely enables us to enter into a space of doubt without compromising the grandeur of a perfected reality as we envision it to be.
So read one more paragraph and then I'll break it down. Go ahead.
Abram cannot imagine God's promise without a progeny. God's promises futures of his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as plentiful as the dust of the earth. Abram's questions: what can you give me, seeing that I am childless? And how shall I know that I am to possess the land? They introduce the elusive promise of a legacy. If God's blessings are things, there must be someone to inherit the stuff when we die. And no one will ever ask God a question like this before.
And no one ever asked God a
No one
question.
has asked like this before.
Right. All right. So first of all, right, like when you think about it, we have imaginations for the way that the future might be, right? Like that's kind of what we do. We spend a lot of time thinking about the future, and we play the what if game, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? And then also we also have fantasies, right? Like, you know, if we acquire this much stuff, then we'll be comfortable, right? But what happens when we're looking at a future and we don't feel like we have all the stuff that we need, right? So welcome to the world of doubt. So you could either be like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of person, white knuckling it, as you say, and you like go out there and like fight against the sort of like tides of opposition and conquer all of the challenges that set in your way, and then sort of achieve or accomplish some kind of goal, and then that way you overcome your difficulties, or you know, maybe you understand that you have everything that you need, right? Maybe it's kind of like a resolution and say, look, I don't know if I have all the stuff, but I'm going to have faith. I'm going to trust that, like, you know, that I'm going to get everything that I'm going to get there. What happens when God promises you something and God hasn't delivered it? So you would say, this is a story about God, right? Who's going to ask a question of God like that? What chutzpah? Abraham is filled with chutzpah. He's filled with all kinds of questions. Like, don't you get it? Like, he's like, the other side, he could just be sheepishly asking this question, but this is not sheepish. This is like, what are you going to give me? You said you're going to give me this thing. Come on. And maybe that's why God chose Avram, because Avram's not afraid to say, hey, what's the deal? Judy.
But it wasn't things he was talking about. He was talking about progeny. And that's like a different thing of wanting things.
Okay.
It's a big, much bigger thing.
Okay. So the comment was it's we're not talking about stuff, right? So we're talking about, there is a distinction to be made here, which I appreciate, right? And that is maybe there's a hierarchy or a threshold when the expectations of what you deserve they're distinguished by the quality of what it is, right? If it's a fancy car versus a child, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a new television show. I think it's called The Baby or something like that. Did you see this? It's like this woman who doesn't, all of her friends are having babies and she doesn't want a baby. And lo and behold, guess what happens? She gets a baby, right? And she can't get rid of the thing. So it's like the ultimate story of like, the thing that you don't want, you get. So here's something that maybe is a little bit different. He doesn't want it, but he wants it, but it's different than just having stuff, right? I don't know. I would maybe say that like also the land. Is the land stuff, Judy, or anybody else?
The land itself.
Kind of and kind of not, right? So let's hold on to it. Pam, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm stuck up a couple paragraphs back. If God said, if you eat from this tree, you're going to die, and they didn't die. So right from the get-go, we can't believe God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it's not about believing in God. It's perhaps about believing in the instruction, which I think is a really great point. And I hope you heard the distinction. It's not so. I think when we hear the voice of God, if we don't have doubt as a part of it, then we might be misled. And I would say, I would say on the negative side, people who say that they, God told them, Pat Robertsons of the world, right? Who, by the way, I think is a fine human being. I'm not dissing him, but it's like, right? Like his wife just passed away, and they were and she was wickedly smart, right? And she wasn't bought into his whole thing, right? But apparently she did, and they went to like Yale University or whatever. It's a really interesting story, and he was doing his thing, and then he felt like he was called by God. And he followed it, and he had a successful career. So I don't necessarily doubt that he didn't hear the voice of God. But what I would caution in this is saying that the voice of God is immutable. That's the thing that I think that might be hanging us up. So maybe God did caution the human beings that they would die, but maybe the death that they experience is something that, at least in the Bible, comes to be a reality. They do physically die. Up until that moment, they're destined to live eternally, which is weird, but okay, right? Go ahead.
Well, I think he said they couldn't eat it because he wanted them to. And maybe it's the death of their
Did that work? Did it flip around?
Yeah.
Maybe it's what. Go ahead, Sherry.
I don't know, the death of their living.
Yeah.
There'd be no story if they didn't eat.
Well,
There'd be, going back to that first quote, the stupid or cocksure, the intelligent or full of doubt. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. No. So
What I'm trying to say.
Fran said maybe it's their soul, right? So there's a part of here that's about cultivating a soul, and there's very much as I mentioned in that first comment about the question, this may be the question that animates the rest of the book, which is all about it. Yes, it's a history book, but it's also about the cultivation of the soul. This is about learning how to be a soul, and the human being had to discover that its nakedness was perhaps it wasn't a physical nakedness, but it was a soullessness. And having the confrontation with doubt is what helps to cultivate the soul. I like that, by the way, and I'm glad it's recorded.
There you go.
Any other comments? Are you guys okay? That was really good.
So it's their fault that we die.
Yeah, I guess if you want to put it that way.
That negates everything.
Or maybe like back to Pam, which might be unsatisfying, right? Is that, yeah, God says, you will die, but we interpret that as a negative. Well, maybe that's a positive,
It doesn't say when.
right? I mean, who said that dying's a bad thing,
It also doesn't say when.
It's-
right?
It's put up as a punishment though, so it's hard to make it a good thing.
You know what? It depends on how it's put up. So a little bit later on today, I'm going to attend the funeral of my wife's great aunt. She died at the ripe and healthy age of 100 and almost 101.
Oh,
And when we celebrated her 100th birthday over the summer, and talking to her son, who by the way is like in his 70s, right? Is like, he's like, her bags are packed, right? Which was beautiful. By the way, he's the rocket scientist of the family, which I thought was just so nice, right? How beautiful is it to be able to say, I've lived life enough, or I've reached a level in my life where my bags are packed. Yeah.
I'm ready. I'm not afraid.
Right. Right. And so Pam, there's something to that too. Right? We are made B'Tselem Elohim. We're made in God's image, but we are not gods.
Don't
And
tell my
because-
son that.
Maybe he would come to your Passover Seder if you told him that. All right, so that's fine. All right, great. Everybody okay? Can we go on for the next one?
Yeah.
All right, Sherry, you want to read?
Sure. Where
All
are
right,
we?
give me a second. Get the text up on the screen.
Where are we?
Where God promises Avram.
Okay.
Bottom of page.
I have it.
Go ahead.
God promises Abram to make him into a great nation. Abram doesn't accept the promise as is given, nor can he see the logical consequence of such a promise because there are no children, no legitimate heirs to his legacy. Here is where faith and reason meet, when the answer to a question may exist beyond the circumstances of the moment. Standing in the awesome presence of divinity could overwhelm us into silence. Abram's question to God here is precisely one of these moments in which the balance shifts, when God is not the only inquisitor of human behavior, but the human being seeks to better understand the rules of existence. Abram is equally curious as to how God will fulfill the promise to be a great nation, as God is entrusting Abram with this duty.
Very nice. Stop there for a second, right? Okay, so part of this is about learning the rules of the game. And this goes to Pam's question, right? Well, wait a minute. I thought the rules of the game are that you should live forever, right? And we messed that up, so we can't live forever. And part of the rules of the game is that we're supposed to be like righteous people, but we keep messing that up, so that's no good. So maybe, right? The game that we're playing is again and again and again and again. How can we lose? Right? You could say that. Or you could say, wait a minute, there's a different game going on. There's a different game going on. And it's not just simply about promises and fulfillment of those promises, or rewards and punishments, or good and evil. There is an evolution, a development, a becoming, a process of becoming here that can only happen perhaps as the agent of those binaries. So for example, this one I think we talk about, and I've used this before in our class, but just to use it again, I talk with my kids and I say, okay, what were your highs and lows? And they're like, oh, we don't know. Today was a terrible day. And I was like, well, give me your least worst thing, because you can't have highs. You can't have highs without lows, right? You can't have good without evil, which is a terrible thing to think about. We wish that we could eradicate evil, but there is an existence of some kind of like separation from a path towards purity, goodness, wholeness, balance that is part of our human experience. And the path is to learn how to navigate that. Now, we could say, look, I reject that. And believe me, a lot of people reject that. until they get into a moment where they have to make a moral decision. And then it's like there's no atheists and foxholes kind of thinking, right? It's the same kind of challenge, right? You cannot live in a world without some recognition that there are rules of the game of life. So what Avram has done here by saying, how do you expect me to inherit the land when I don't have any children, is a call into question of what are the rules of the game. Okay, any comments, reactions to that? Sherry, you want to finish?
Yes. This covenantal moment deepens the initial command from God. If God does not respond to Abram here, the journey narrative unravels into an aimless search for this promise. That is why God responds with the promise. Look toward heaven and count the stars. If you are able to count them, so shall your offspring be. More than a quantity of infinite value, to be a blessing presumes a measure of self-exploration and discovery that God no longer provides. God's promise to Abram cannot be fulfilled without the covenantal agreement, and Abram's imagination is limitless.
Very nice. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so what's this about? So as much as this is about like, promises and fulfillment of those promises, there's actually the Jewish understanding of relationship with humanity is a covenantal one. Is that, in other words, we look at the world and say our humanity is completely human when we are aspiring to a relationship with divinity. We're not fully human unless we're in partnership. So we're not satisfied with just being a compliant, a compliant and obedient servant of God. We actually are celebrated and commanded to challenge. We are commanded to grapple. We are commanded to explore, because in that process of exploration, we discover our own humanity. And what I think that these two questions have begun to lie for us in the foundation is that doubt is the lever. It's the mechanism which enables us to ask really good questions. Right, Judy?
Well, I think in Judaism, we're always encouraged to ask questions, but what about other religions that lay it all out for you, and you can't have any doubt about,
So while this isn't a world religions class, I'll just make the quick comment. I think Judaism is the gift that Judaism continually brings to humanity, because the world needs us to ask questions. We are celebrated and reviled for it.
Yes, that's true.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Lauren.
I think
Thank you.
in life sometimes, so you have doubt, that doubt sometimes turns to fear. And then because you don't know how to act out in fear, that sometimes comes through as anger sometimes. And so
Yeah.
a lot of angry people maybe are doubtful people, because they're doubting things and they're fearing things, and they just come across, they don't know how to express that. And so they're angry all the time.
Very nice. Yeah. So to respond to that, what I think is going on is that anger as an emotion is the unrequited resolution of doubt. And so what's happening is, when you have an uncertainty and you can't control the situation with curiosity or with a way to overwhelm it. Yes, please. Thank you. That when that happens, if you feel like you're not well equipped with everything that it takes to answer that, you have anger, right? That's when we usually get angry. I have anger. I'm going to admit it. I mean, this is not therapy, but I'm going to like, I get angry at my kids. I get angry with Becky. I get angry in workplaces sometimes, right? So, but the anger, the anger is usually like, I'm right and you're wrong, right? Well, if I'm right, then how come I'm being so darn angry about it, right? So usually there's something about it inside that says maybe there's a better way to approach it, right? And that might just be kind of like what you said, Lauren, is a little bit of fear that I don't have all of the tools that I need to equip to respond to the uncertainty, the doubt that I have. But I think, good human being, human living, human becoming is resolving that doubt without allowing anger to be the motivating emotion in response. Anything else? Yeah, Jay.
Taking this to like a meta level, what about, there are a lot of Jews who doubt that this story actually occurred, and where reason and faith don't connect. But so how do we work through that? And are the answers in the text is this what we're actually talking about?
Right. So I think, right, it's the same thing like, with my son, remember, right, living to 120 years old and then like crying because he's like, oh my God, my friend who's a couple months older than me is going to die before me, right? It's like the most hard, because if we look at the world and say everything's empirical and it's all about facts, so reason as a sort of like, evolution of thinking in sort of the human community, provided a necessary tool for us to evolve in our humanity, but it isn't the conclusion, right? It's actually a feature of that sort of like quest of resolving uncertainty, right? So like the scientist is not, we think that scientists are not religious. Most scientists have a very healthy religious life. It's just different manners of language that are used to try and describe what it is that they're experiencing. The issue that you have, that you brought up, that a lot of us have, is they say, I don't like to go to shul, and I don't want some rabbi or some priest telling me God is great and just believe in God and trust in everything, because as long as you trust, everything will be all right. Which, by the way, if you believe in that, it works kind of nicely, right? But like, it's a trust but verify kind of approach. So I'm going to tell you, Jay, that in this book, these stories are not historically accurate. I have no problem saying that, but that doesn't diminish my faith in the book. First of all, because I just think like how remarkable it is that 3,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, depending on when you want to say that these were starting to be collected, right? Which is way longer than I've ever been in existence. That these were the things that they were trying to capture. To me, that has an element of divinity. And what they were trying to get at wasn't that like they were recording, this is how it came to be. They were trying to describe, it's a mythology. They were trying to describe, and they were trying to do it in the most effective way possible. It's a myth, right? That's the definition of myth. That's a definition of what a myth is. Myth is, we imply myth as a fantasy. That's not it, right? A myth is a story to explain how things came to be. Okay? That's what we're dealing with here. So you know what? In that way, Jay, I totally believe in the Torah. Undoubtedly. Did 2 million leave Egypt and cross the Red Sea? Maybe. I haven't seen any factual proof of it yet. But I do have this text, which gives me a lot of knowledge about if that did happen, what would I make sense out of it to be? Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. I think the fact that we're discussing these events, whether they actually occurred, there's so much to learn from.
Yeah. It's really good, right? That's why you're in the class. I'm glad you're with us. Speaking of which, yes. Oh, Linda's got her hand raised. Hold on. She's raising her hand.
I was 15 in a pre-confirmation class when Rabbi Bergman talked about the Torah.
Who's my rabbi? She looked at me, right? He was my teacher in rabbinical school. Oh, yeah. Wow. I'll tell you more in a second.
anyway, he talked about the Torah to 15-year-olds and told us there are truths with a capital T and truths with a little t.
Yeah.
And you have to just pay attention because the capital T are the ethical and moral teachings. And the little t are stories.
It's interesting.
That is beautiful.
And
Right.
I've always
I love
kind
that.
of looked at
Yeah.
the Bible like that.
Right.
Wonderful.
It helps us. By the way, I mean, Harry Potter notwithstanding, I still think that this is like the best-selling book in the history of humanity, right?
Yes.
Harry Potter was pretty seriously
Yeah,
like rivalry,
seriously good.
right? But like the Bible's still good, and I mean, I hope it still continues to be studied. I mean, I think that we're living in a time and an age where the demand for information and knowledge is so rapid that the nuance, what I just spent 5 minutes going through, most people don't have patience for. That's the problem, right? It is a problem. So I could TikTok it, and I could Instagram it, and I could get it in easily digestible things, but that might not do it, because even after I capture the attention in 30 seconds or less, or in 140 characters or less, remember Twitter when it used to be only 140 characters or less? Speaking of which, yeah. Well, it just, $44 billion later,
I
right?
know.
That like, even after you establish something profound in that short amount of time, without investing in your being, it's not going to be anything that's going to have impact in your life, right? Which thankfully you're all here. Speaking of that, it's 12 o'clock. How you guys doing? You want like a little? Let's take a little bio break, okay? Little bio break, okay? What, Lauren?
No, I said, good.
Oh, good. All right, take a break, everybody.
We need a host.
For May 3rd, yeah.
I can host.
What do you
All
want?
right, Sherry's hosting the 3rd.
I'll do the
Pam is doing the
24th.
10th.
Pam the 10th.
And
Linda's the
she-
17th.
And I'm the 24th.
There we go. All
Got
right,
it.
I'm just gonna write it down.
Judy.
So it's
the
Sherry,
Pam.
Pam,
And I could probably do the 31st.
Linda,
And who
Sherry,
said
Pam,
that?
Linda, Judy.
right, Judy, and then
Lauren.
Lauren.
I could do the 31st. I just
Okay.
have to kick everybody out.
Well,
Where do you
we-
live, Sherry?
We're far.
Calabasas.
Down the street from Shelley Baker.
What's that?
Shelley Baker. Oh, up in those.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Right above AC Stell.
You'll send us a,
Yeah.
All right, we'll come back to it. All right, great.
Sherry, May 3rd.
So, like I said, we're not gonna get through, let's just get through one more today, and thank you, everybody. I hopefully it's still been, fulfilling as a class. I mean, this is actually, this is some of the first times that I've taught this material. So it's been good for me. So I also want feedback as we go into this. So let's do, if we can get through these two, they're kind of like wonderful. I'll just say the next kind of 3 sections are all about, they're all about giving birth to children. You could even say the last one was also about giving birth to children, even though it was in the voice of Avram. But there's such an interesting kind of thread between Avram's challenge to God, now Sarah's challenge to God. Well, we're going to try to figure out like who she's challenging. And then it's kind of like the angels are sort of wondering where Sarah is. And then Rebecca, when she's got Isaac and she's got Jacob and Esau, the twins rumbling in her womb, and she's very uncomfortable. She's like, she has a question that comes out of that. So who's this?
This is Puppers.
Oh, we like
That's our
Puppers.
son Daniel.
Hey.
As soon as not to wash his feet right now because probably track wetness.
Oh, no problem. So if he jumps on me, then
Yeah, you're doomed.
okay, good. Nice to meet you.
Josh,
All right. Yes.
I may have spoken too soon. I have to check with my older kids. Are they okay?
No worries. We'll check. Don't worry.
Right.
So Okay, so
Does anybody?
we can figure it after our learning.
You can
Okay,
always ask Barbara.
Okay, he's in the cage.
right. So so let's do a little bit of reading. Candy, do you feel like reading a little bit? Okay, so
Where would you like me to start?
we're talking about, it's on I guess like the third page. Is that what it is? Would you tell God you don't believe?
Oh,
Third page. Wait a minute.
Okay, that one's for you.
Oh, I'm on, oh yeah, give me your screen, okay. Oh, wait a second, Norman, can you turn that off for a second? Can you shut that off for a second so I can read this? Thank you, honey. Okay, all right.
oh,
The irony of nakedness or the questions?
The irony of nakedness.
Yeah, that's it.
Start.
Or start on the irony of nakedness, okay.
The irony of that's fine.
Right. The irony of nakedness in the opening chapters of Genesis is that there is no reference point to induce any embarrassment by one's vulnerability. Nakedness prompts the question, is vulnerability innate or learned? Here, two moments reveal a sense of nakedness in the form of barrenness that can only be satisfied with the divine response. The vulnerability of barrenness has not been explored between God and humanity at this point. We simply know Sarah is barren and feels shame when her perception of Hagar's pregnancy lowers her in the esteem of her maidservant. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, go ahead.
But do Abraham and Sarah feel ashamed here? Abraham asked God, can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear a child at 90? Followed by Sarah's question here. Now that what?
Sorry, we've got a peanut gallery over here.
Oh, okay.
They're like answering the questions before you're finishing the sentence. No, we can't have it that way.
Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?
Yeah.
I'm hearing the peanut gallery here. We first read these as expressions of corporal concern. Even later, when Sarah posits in disbelief, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? At the point of reference for this vulnerability is not God. Ironically, it's toward themselves.
Okay, so stop right there for a second, right? So what we're looking at is when we see nakedness, right, or we could see the vulnerability of nakedness, okay, and a part of our confrontation with our vulnerability, especially in the Jewish spectrum of things, is to make fun of ourselves, right? Like we're really good at that. Self-deprecation, I believe they call it, right? We got it down. We're like masters of it, right? Because it's better for us to make fun of ourselves than it is to confront the fact that like others may perceive us as being in some way vulnerable, weak, or inferior. So the idea is that you make fun of yourself, and that's a way of it's a defense mechanism. On the other hand, the concept that vulnerability is something that that is worth like taking into consideration when you're talking about faith is, I think, it's an incredibly insightful feature of what the Bible's about. It would be one thing to talk about heroes, right? Here's, Abraham's a hero. Go to a land that I will show you, says God. And Abraham goes to the land and he fights a bunch of people and he triumphs. And then he says, what about all my kids? And God says, I'm going to give you kids. And like all that stuff, you would think it would be a hero story, but it's not. So the irony, like we were talking earlier about a mythology, right? Look at the mythology that is being revealed to us. The mythology that's being revealed to us is a sense of overcoming these vulnerabilities, this nakedness, this uncertainty, this doubt that exists in our lives, right? That if there is a God that is a part of the story, it's not a God that takes care of everything when it's bad. That's the Santa Claus, right? But it's potentially the force that animates our ability to overcome the uncertainty. That's what we're trying to look at. So now when Abraham asks God says, you're going to have a kid, right? And they're like, are you kidding me? Right? because like I'm 90 years old and I guess, you know, I've never been 90 before, but like, you know, 90-year-old people aren't supposed to be having kids, right, God? Right? And God's like, you know, I'm God. I can even I can make it happen, right? Or Sarah, look at she says, yeah, by the way, with her, don't take this personally. Right? Don't, it's actually right. It does mean that she's like menopausal,
Minimally.
right? No, that's exactly what it is, right? I'm right. I'm,
Yeah.
you know, because she's 75, like she's
over the.
As she
she's
should be.
what's that? Yeah, she's she's reached that way, right? And in her life, so she's saying like the physicality of my ability is hampered here, but don't read it about their own the limitations of their physicality are what caused them to ask the question. But it's not about what God can or cannot do. It's about them. It's about what they can do.
Right.
Okay. Hold on to that. We're not going to resolve that. But that's sort of like the foundation of why the questions are asked in the first place. Who was reading? Want to keep on reading? What's that?
Who's reading?
Pam Ross, why don't you start reading?
Here we go.
And still, tone can dramatically change the impact of these questions. Is the tone like that of Abraham, who will confront God before the destruction of Sodom? Is this the tone of laughter expressed in response to an idea that seems delightfully beyond human comprehension? Is the tone one of doubt, that their curiosity is a hint of their disbelief?
All right, so just to, you know, this is one of the few moments where I play with tone, and it's important because this question depends on how you read this. Do you read this with skepticism? Do you read this with awe, or do you read this with like, you know, doubt, right? Which is, you know, or like, yeah, go on. Okay.
Okay,
Go on.
these questions invite all three possibilities and offer meaningful understandings of the text that follows and the pending arrival of Isaac. If we read the questions as confrontation, Abraham and Sarah embody a cautious faith, one that invites conversation with God, even argument with God, but does not see how the rules of biology and nature can be overcome by God's omnipotence. If we read the questions as those with levity, the disbelief is one closer to self-doubt than God doubt. Their laughter is both a veil for their own uncertainties in their abilities as it is incomprehensible.
Hence the Jewish comedian,
Definitely,
right?
definitely.
Go on.
I need more.
Oh. No, go ahead. Yeah.
If we read the questions with a doubtful curiosity, we are still met with a layer of meaning not easily gleaned from the surface of the text, the expression of limitation. The awareness that physical ability becomes limited as one ages is also a novel subject for the Torah. Here, it appears that the experience of embarrassment is also a dissolution of innocence. Lack of belief isn't an affront to divinity. On the contrary, divine knowledge is the recognition of that which once was a limitation has now become a possibility. Without authentic doubt, limitations arrest a relationship. Through doubt, by contrast, even the possibility of bearing a child in old age is powerful enough to overcome shame and confirm one's faith.
Okay. So this last statement, right? Don't what I think is important to hold on to is not that, like, you know, it's physically possible, which, by the way, it has been proven to have a child in one's old age. I think the oldest woman to give birth to a child was in her 80s, right? Have you heard that? Right? Like, so, right, at which point you would be like, right? Like, who would want to be a mom when they're 82, right? You're like, but whatever. Okay, so physical, right? It's going back to the same concept of how many years in our life do we live, right? If it's a determinate amount, then our challenge is going to be, how do we measure the relative experience to the determinate amount. But life is not that determinate. So we don't know the day that we're going to die, just like we don't know the day that we're going to stop producing children. So the idea is that if you have a sense of curiosity about what is possible, then it opens up the door, not to say that like, oh, I can have kids when, you know, I'm postmenopausal. No, obviously, like biology doesn't say that that's likely. But what it does say is that you having a curiosity or an openness about a future that isn't foreclosed by our doubt is something that faith is really trying to address, right? And it even has the potential, according to what we're reading with Abraham and Sarah, to transcend what we define as physical limitations.
Maybe 90 wasn't 90 like it is now. I mean, the years might have been counted differently. So that maybe
Quite
it was only 50 or 60 in our years.
Quite possibly so, especially because it says that a child be born to a man 100 years old, right? Or actually, and she's at 90, right? So he was 99, right? Whatever that means. So like 99, 100, like what, you know, the specifics, right? If the Torah is about literal specificity, it's not, it's going to fail in our estimation time and again. So that's an interesting and important point to add to it. Anything about that?
Well, just the experience of embarrassment is also a dissolution of innocence. I think that's incredible. Because when kids start to feel that shame and stuff, they lose their innocence.
It's beautiful.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I don't know why that had to come about.
Well, it's not sadness. It's real, right? Right. No, I think it's like when you have to tell a child, like, where did grandma go? Right. And it's sad that you have to tell them, whether it's, you know, about bodies or whatever, right? It's sad that it's a dissolution of the innocence. Yes. However, a child's resilience towards innocence, that I think is even more profound. It's not that our attempt is to preserve innocence. It's actually the more that we can helpfully reveal reality or the authenticity of being in the world, the better it is, right? I think that's actually, look, that's why getting older is better. Okay. Than the alternative. Lauren?
Well, you know, I taught first grade for many, many years, and there's that thin line between, you know, reality and innocence. And, you know, and I used to say to the parents, keep them innocent as long as you can. You know, reality is right around the corner. You know, and I always say this story. There's always some little kid who came in at Christmas time and said, did you know Santa wasn't real? And the look on everybody else is said, what do you mean Santa isn't real? And then they would ask me if I thought Santa was real. And I said, if you believe Santa is real, then Santa is real. If you believe the Easter Bunny is real, then the Easter. I still believe in the Tooth Fairy. I mean, why not? You know, and I would say to them, you would never let them play a video game that was violent. You would never let them watch an R-rated movie. Keep them innocent for as long as you can, because
Good luck with that.
Right. Well, it's an interesting.
Now it's a whole different crazy thing. But then, I mean, that was, you know, that was in the 90s and the 2000s when you didn't have stuff on your cell phone. But
yeah, I think it's such a really important point. And because we're sort of coming to the end of our class today, we'll hold it with this conversation, because if the comment is about doubt, right? These are questions that come in this book that are all about doubt. And the idea that the book has built into the mechanics of the story that it's trying to tell some kind of like confrontation with the doubt. And at least in this last question, we're invited to interpret it with the tone in which that doubt is presented, whether it's disbelief, awe, or skepticism, right? Whatever it is that we're sort of feeling about it, first of all, the fact that it's present is a validation. Second of all, it does say something that everybody's been really beautiful about, really saying beautifully, which is that like innocence is something to be protected and preserved, but it isn't something to be guarded or separated, because because I think that, first of all, it's impossible,
That's right.
right? And it's also unhealthy, right? I mean, like, you know, if you don't teach a kid to stay away from the stove, right? Right, they're gonna get hurt. So that's there's healthy ways to overcome innocence. And I think the goal is, what Lauren is saying is that, like, the goal is to help at the right place and at the right time and in the right environment to reveal the innocence. So we still have not told my 14-year-old that the tooth fairy doesn't exist. She knows. Oh my God.
I still believe in it. Absolutely. Why
She
not?
lost a tooth. Hold on a second, Jay. She lost a tooth during COVID, and we're like so lazy because we know if we go in the door, she's gonna wake up. So we put little coins, and we like left the trail, and then we left a note saying she was like 13 years old, and we left a note, and we're like, we didn't want to come in the room because of COVID.
Why not? Why not keep
And you
it
know
going?
what? And she's like, come on, the tooth fairy is not real. You guys are the tooth fairy, right? My other two, they don't even ask, right? Because they know who it is, but they don't even ask. But this one asks.
One sure.
And you know what? Do you hear what I'm saying? This one asks.
Uh-huh.
Ah,
As long as she's asking,
Yeah.
as long as she's asking, there's something. There's something. Jay, did you want to say something?
Yes, well, actually, I was in the first grade for many, many years.
You look familiar.
To me, the most important sentence of this whole text is divine knowledge is the recognition of that which was once a limitation, now has become a possibility.
ah.
To me, that's beautiful. Very Jewish, maybe.
Where is that?
That's in that last paragraph that we read.
Oh,
The recognition that was once limitation has now become a possibility. I think that's something very hopeful for me. I like.
It's kind of, thank you.
This is a good piece.
It's kind of nice to see that we live by, right? Because if we see doubts
Knowledge
as
is the recognition.
potential possibilities, if you will, that may be like a repetitive or redundancy, but that's exactly what it is. If you see that those things that are there, boy, that'll get rid of anger. That'll get rid of despair, right? So thank you, Jay, for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Excellent.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for learning today. Have a wonderful week. We will reconvene next week, whether it's in person or via Zoom. Sherry's going to give us a confirmation, or are you certainly not available?
probably a no.
Well,
They haven't had it yet.
All right, she's
Yes,
so,
got COVID,
I'm
got
sorry.
COVID melting in her house.
all right. So without putting this on, bye, Lori, take care. Without putting this on Barbara, although that's funny, just to do it because she's not here, and she would more than willingly host. Why don't we plan on Zoom for all of us, okay?
Oh, Zoom. Unless Barbara says we could meet at her house.
Right. I'm gonna reach out to Barbara and see if she'll host, okay?
May 3rd.
Yeah, May 3rd.
So it's Zoom or Barbara.
Right. And I'll
We
let
don't know.
everybody know when I
I
communicate.
think in the beginning, she said she could host every week.
Right.
Yeah, she's.
So I just don't want to presume.
Right.
All right.